Welcome to the Rant Live. Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, on Tuesday, October 18th. It is not a ton going on around the Cubs. We're still in speculation season. That continues until probably about, I guess, the second week of November, which is when free agency will kickstart, and then we can stop speculating. Well, we'll continue to speculate. I mean, that never ends.
Yeah, that's constant. We should just speculate. I'm about to that point where there will be nothing factual ever again. It'll purely be speculation.
That's a lot of people do that these days. And they get away with it, and they get followings, and like they're super popular.
That's what's amazing to me is there are people who can
Heyman.
Yeah. Who can just say the dumbest stuff, and be wrong all the time, despite having quote unquote insider sources, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so,
tell me more.
And I want to be careful with that because our name is literally Cubs Insider, which people make fun of us for. And it was
just a name
had to do with, it's okay, folks, it's okay. But or I shouldn't say make fun of, like they hold it, whoa, insider, like it's derogatory. I'm like, we have broken some stuff, but anyway, but people can be wrong all the time. With a national platform, right? And just tons of exposure. And then on the other side, you got a lot of folks who are just rumor mongers, right? Not even on the national, but like who will gain a following by just constantly effectively making stuff up, right? And there's no, they've got a fake name or a cartoon avatar or whatever, and so they're not a real person, so they can get away with it, right? Because they're just making stuff up or running with every little report. And I actually got into it, I think it was a couple years ago, and I'm trying to remember, it was like there was this couple of kids, they were like high school students, who were just, our source says, and like this deal's about to happen, and they would put this stuff out there, and then they would delete it if it was wrong, right? Like they would put out a whole post, like they would tweet about it and put out this post, and then if it was wrong, they would delete it. And it's like, that's complete bullshit. Like, I've been wrong on stuff before, right? And what's funny too is, like, I could report that the Cubs are trying to aggressively trade Ian Happ, and then he doesn't get traded. People are, well, you said. I'm like, I didn't say they did trade him or would trade him. They wanted to. It just didn't happen. But, some of these people are like, Cubs are about to trade for, and I called these kids out on it, and then they were like really pissy about it.
I remember that, actually. It didn't last very long, but.
No, and it was some weird, I don't think they stuck around. But there is a segment, as you might be able to imagine, a lot of it's on one of the social media platforms that I won't mention because I know there's people watching us from various different ones, but where there is a larger segment of people who might perhaps be a little bit less discerning about the news they take in, right? And so
I think some of that, though, goes to the volume of the stuff that goes on out there, right? I mean, it's like,
true.
I'm not much of a Twitterer, if that's a thing. I just made that up, so John Furley's right there on that trademark. Anyways, it's just, there's so much going on out there. It's like, it's hard to believe. And so you tend to look at the Bob Nightingales and John Heymans, the people who, as you mentioned, kind of write for these national publications and should, what they say should be closer to the truth than kind of what all the other people are saying. But then what happens, it goes off the rails when they're not. And the problem is that they're not somewhat more frequently than you think they would be. And then that just makes it kind of a prime environment for, all the people who think they know things and don't. And then it creates just like this stew of opinions that are just really hard to track.
Yeah. And I think, I think with any of this stuff, right, the way it all kind of comes through is if you're able to kind of look at things from different angles, right? If you're able to take a little bit, and a lot of this stuff is like, somebody might say something with Nightingale. I trust it because I think he's got a pretty direct conduit into things that are going on with it, like with Tony La Russa and the other stuff.
Did you just say you trust Nightingale?
I said on that topic, if it involves the White Sox, as it was with Tony La Russa, and Jerry Reinsdorf, right? He's got some people who were his old school buddies, right? Who he's going to get the word directly from them. But in general, he types things out incorrectly. He makes really dumb proclamations about things. Heyman is very much connected to both. He's got his hand absolutely in the pockets of who am I thinking? Scott Boras, other agents, but definitely the owners and definitely the New York-based set. And so a lot of what he said, so then what you have to look at is say, okay, how much of this is true? What percentage of truth is there in this? And how much of it is something that you're saying based on an agenda that someone else has, that they're using you as a mouthpiece, right? And you have to put this out so you can keep that going.
That's the hard thing is trying to decipher and interpret, kind of all that information, which we really shouldn't have to do, but unfortunately you kind of do. It's like, where are the special interests behind that statement, and how's this person connected to, party A, B, and C? And so I think that's the toughest part of trying to figure out what they're saying. And we're always left doing that because they're national guys. And whenever they say something, it gets a lot more publicity. And that's the hardest part about that, I think.
Yeah. And it's, but there is, again, there is a desire, right? And this, I think for all of us, it's easier or it's more fun to think, especially when a team like the Cubs maybe isn't doing that well, right? There's always that desire to think about what could be or what could have been, because it's either more hopeful or it's sexier, or whatever you want to call it, than thinking about what is. Because right now, what is a team that, finished almost 20 games under and, isn't playing postseason baseball. For the second disappointing season in a row, and even when they did play, it was pretty bad. And so, and we do have a comment on here about the latest Keith Law piece, which I just wrote about. I just was sharing on Twitter and Facebook because I published it right before we jumped on here. But there again, and that's why the whole idea of prospects, right? When we talk about prospects, the whole reason that's been such a big part of Cubdom, again, right? It goes in cycles, but it's because there's not a whole lot to really root for at Chicago. And so we really have to look more and more at the guys who are coming up. And that's why it's so much fun to talk about, write about, follow the exploits of the prospects and the other minor leaguers in general. So, there's a lot there. And I get it. I get that people want something to hang on to, although, it's really, really weird, and I'm seeing it more and more now, how a lot of people's default is just to be negative. Like, there's a lot of people who I don't think are happy about anything, where it's like they have so convinced themselves that the Cubs will never, ever spend again, that the Cubs don't want to win, that, even when I put out like, hey, they don't need to go win 105. Like, a lot of people think they need to add 15 new players. Like, they don't need to go win 105 games. They need to get in, right? They need to build a team
that's never been more evident than this offseason, where you've got 3 of the 4 teams that won over 100 games are out of the playoffs.
Yeah. And they're bitching about it. It's like, it's a 5-game series, dude. Don't lose 3 games out of 5. There's your solution. Oh, well, we should just be given a free trip to the World Series for winning 107 games or whatever. Like, no. But, the Cubs were ill-constructed in 2020, and that was a short season anyway. But, they were very prone to falling apart.
A real season.
No, but
really
basically, you look at it, you say, hey, the Braves won, 85 games? Is that what it was? 88
last
games?
year?
Yeah. Like, they won the division, but they had fewer wins than 11 other teams in baseball. You don't have to go out and have a dominant team. But these people are still like, even to put it that way, people are like, this is stupid. The Cubs don't even want to do that. Why would they ever? It's like, my goodness. It's so funny how that all has kind of come around, right? To where
there's definitely a lot of static.
Mad. Yeah, people just want to be mad sometimes, and that just got to suck. And I feel sorry for those folks. But excuse me, and then there's a group that's like perpetually optimistic and thinks that it's all going to work out perfectly. And you gotta find that you gotta find that middle ground. And it's like, it's okay to be optimistic and realistic, but like it's just, and I get it. I get where some of this comes from, but
I tend to think sometimes, and you mentioned the Keith Law write-up on Matt Mervis, and really to me, sometimes it feels like, all right, the Cubs have a huge following and they generate a lot of traffic on any website, especially a website like The Athletic. We have a blog. We know how much traffic we get because the Cubs are a very popular team. And so anytime you write anything about the Cubs, you're going to generate probably some pretty good traffic. And I would imagine on The Athletic, that's the key. And that's definitely the case. And so you've got a guy like Keith Law writing up, like fundamentally, if you think about saying something negative about the Cubs minor league player of the year, a guy, Matt Mervis, who's absolutely just raked. And it's like, it really feels to me like this write-up from Keith Law. And look, we're sitting here talking about it. So he's won, right? I mean, if his objective was to get people riled up and to get clicks on the website, he's won, because he comes out with this just absurd write-up of Matt Mervis that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Some of the things he says in here, he talks about him. You quoted him in your piece that you just published, talking about, he got 3 home runs, all coming on hanging breaking balls, pitches he's not likely to ever see in the majors. Oh yeah, because no one in the majors has ever thrown a hanging breaking ball.
No one's hung one.
Never.
And here's what I have the problem with.
There's a couple. Smart.
Right. No, and nor is it to say, he can only hit hanging breaking balls. He'll just pop up inside heat. And I get that Law was there for those home runs. He saw those, but then to call the AFL light on pitching, which
that's a joke. That's such a joke.
And but what I didn't like was he was just like, he went undrafted twice out of Duke. Like, why do you have to mention that? That feels like you're intentionally digging this guy.
Exactly.
Right. And then the fact that he was 24 years old, started out at high A, right? But obviously I'm looking at all these other things and I'm going, okay, so you watched him play like 3 games and saw, like, if we're going to say that's the measure of a player, during which he hit 3 home runs, by the way, which is one of which I think came off a lefty. And these are other teams' top prospects as well, in most cases, at least. That part was kind of funny. But what really got me was the fact that someone then presented the data that said, hey, in AAA, 62 games, he hit 360, with put his slash, but he had a 360 batting average, whatever, against 4-seamers. And against pitches 94 miles an hour and up, he hit like 323 with the 5-something slug, and was one of the better fastball hitters in AAA over a much larger sample. And then someone kind of responded to that and asked Law, and he was like, whatever, I'm not getting dragged into this, but that's incorrect. And it's like, wait a minute, you're dismissing data over a larger sample at the highest level of the minors in favor of the 3 games that you watched or 2 games that you watched.
He's an expert, because I'm an expert too, because I've been to 2 of the Mesa Solar Sox games. So I'm a pro too.
Yeah, that part that's the part that got me, is like, and that, and he bristled at some of that. And that's the part that says to me that, but I do think, he knows where his bread is buttered. That's part of it.
Yeah.
And I mean, Law is known for being kind of a curmudgeonly dude at times. And some people even commented on there that maybe the scouting game has passed him by a little bit. And that's entirely possible, right? Because I'm like, you can't just you don't get to just throw out this full season. And Alex Cohen mentioned in there, like, I've seen Mervis take a 98-mile-an-hour high fastball from a lefty 430 feet the other way. I don't think bat speed is an issue. But that's the part that got me. The one assessment, most of them were like these subtle digs, but he said his bat speed isn't great. Like he doesn't have great bat. Like he's not going to be any good. And then comped him to Dan Vogelback, which, I mean, hey, that's like, if that's your floor, that's not that bad. I mean, Vogelback's not great by any stretch, but he's been a serviceable major league hitter for several years now. I think Mervis can be much better than that. And there wasn't anything in there that said, wow, hey, this guy played only 16 games in his senior season at Duke, and he was also a pitcher. And so he didn't focus on his hitting until really once he got to become a professional. I mean, full time on his hitting. So yeah. There was so much context missing from that. And it did feel like one of those where it felt very much like a hot take for the sake of kind of, poking the bear, so to speak. And but that stuff bothers me. But there again, like I said, what really bugs me is that he put that out there, and then when presented with contrary factual evidence, just immediately dismissed it. And it's like, that's not how it works, dude.
Again,
that
feels like together. Yeah, exactly. It just feels like something that he put out there just to get clicks, to be honest with you. I mean,
it felt very Jim Bowden-esque.
It just feels very weird. I think there's a lot of pressure on these guys from within their organizations, be it the Athletic or whatever organizations they write for, to get clicks. I think that's the analytics departments at these publications are probably on these guys to get clicks. And so they probably, they come up with weird stuff that to us seems really weird, but it does end up getting a lot of clicks. And that's the whole problem with the internet, people, is that it's become this thing where it's just what's important is the number of clicks you get on something, or likes, or whatever, or retweets, or, so like the crazier the statement, the more, it doesn't make sense, the more it gets tweeted and shared and talked about and speculated and things like that. And so it's the internet world we live in is a little funky like that. And so that's where you have to kind of decipher. And what you said, kind of like where you're going to err on, being really conservative on something or just being way out there on something. You try to meet in the middle. And it can be difficult sometimes, to do that, because everybody wants to talk about the latest, like, crazy thing that's been said or done. And nobody wants to talk about kind of the reality of the situation. And so I think that's kind of where we are.
And I want to be clear on this. I think we've talked about it before. Like, at the end of the day, our site doesn't exist if people don't come to read what we put out there, right? There's no point. I mean, I suppose if you're doing it purely for love, but even if you're not making a crap ton of money off of it, I think there's inherently the reason anyone would write or share their knowledge, whatever you want to call it, and put stuff out publicly. Well, the reason you're doing that is for people to write it. Otherwise, you're just going to be like emailing it to your buddies or whatever, you know what I mean? Or sending it in a text to someone. So yeah, it's being put out for public consumption. That's why we tweet it out. That's why we have a Facebook page and a Twitter account and things like that. But I think what's funny is when people, accuse someone of clickbait, when it's like, you need to understand what clickbait is, right? That's something that is intentionally misleading, or that uses a picture of like a scantily clad woman. It's like, you'll never believe what they did next. And it's like, it's not clickbait to actually describe in the headline what you are going to produce in terms of the piece itself. Like, I'm supposed to tell you that. If you weren't interested in it, if the headline was boring and said, Cubs did some stuff and things, then it's not giving you any kind of a hook to read. That's the whole point.
Some people and some sites are kind of worse, bigger offenders, I think, of the whole clickbait thing. And I mean, speaking of that, John Heyman suggested that the Cubs were lurking on Aaron Judge. Again, that feels to me a lot like him just kind of saying, I'm just going to throw this little statement in on the Cubs and that'll get some run for me, because Is that realistic? No, not at all. Do the Yankees think that? Probably not. And did Jon Heyman make that up just to get clicks? Probably.
Yeah, but is it helpful to Aaron Judge and his agent? Is it helpful to them to have more of this hype? And that's what it comes down to. Is like, do the Cubs need power? Yes. Could they use somebody who plays center field? Yep. But Aaron Judge has drastically increased his market value, right? With the 62 homers and 11.4 WAR. I mean, just a massive season, historically good season. Still not the leading home run hitter, but of all time, but still very, very good. But he's going to be 31 next year. Yeah. He is a big dude, unless he's willing to take a 4-year deal. If the Cubs were like, here's $160 million for 4 years, there's no way in hell that dude's going to be able to get more years and more total money somewhere else. And the Cubs giving a player of his ilk that much money, when they've said specifically, we're not trying to really hamper ourselves. I mean, now, could he move over to left field eventually if Hap is gone, and you get PCA in there? Yeah, of course. But I don't see any way that Judge fits with what the Cubs are trying to, because some people think he's going to, they think $300 million is the minimum. I can see no way where the Cubs go 8 to 10 to 12 years on a 31-year-old.
Oh, God.
For $300 million? There's no way.
That would go completely directly against what Jed Hoyer and Tom Ricketts have been saying they want to do. It's just, and he's right-handed bat too. It's like, he'd have to be a lefty for it to even be plausible.
And be like 4 years younger,
Well,
it would. Now, if that was the case, if Aaron Judge was going to be in his age 27, which is, so we'll put it this way: if he was going to be the age that Jason Hayward was when the Cubs signed him, right? That was the other thing about Hayward that was so wild. Was like he was only 26 because he came up so early. He hit free agency at such a young age. Judge is not a young man. If he were 4 or 5 years younger, hell yeah, you could look at that as, then you'd be looking at it like, oh, great, he'll be 31 in the 5th year of his deal or whatever, the 6th year of his deal, 4th. Either way, like you're looking at saying we're going to get 6 to 7 really good years out of this. As it is, right? I mean, the Yankees are looking at it like when the Yankees are questioning whether they'll go, like somebody even speculated that his deal could go to 360 or 400 million, that he could surpass Mike Trout's deal, and even that is looking potentially rough. For as good as Mike Trout is, the back years of that deal make the value really questionable. I just don't see any way that even a Cubs team that is willing to spend a ton of money, I don't know how Judge fits that in their whole big picture. That would be, to me, just an egregious mistake.
There's a big argument to be made that the Cubs should never sign anybody to longer than a 5-year contract. I mean, unless, like you said, it's a 24, 25-year-old person, because it's just, we've seen it just ruin organizations, and I mean, it straddles you for years. I mean, look at what has happened with Jason Hayward. And there's obviously the recency of all that happening that's fresh on the minds of Jed Hoyer and Tom Ricketts. There is no way on earth they are going to sign anybody to a deal. To me, I'd be surprised if they signed anybody to a deal that was over 5 years this offseason, and that includes Carlos Correa. I mean, maybe you go 6.
He would really be the one that I'd see them going a little bit longer, just because he is still on the young side relative to, specifically relative to his market. I mean, he's a year to 18 months younger than, I think, what Bogarts and Turner in there, but yeah, I mean, there are some things out there. Certainly, they're not going to try to hamper them, so especially with the outfield too. Like the outfield is where the Cubs have their greatest collection of talent overall. If you look at PCA, Alexander Canario, Brennen Davis, Kevin Alcantara, Owen Casey, like their top position player prospects are mostly outfielders, or largely outfielders. I should say. Now, could some of those guys be involved in a trade? Again, I know there's been a lot of buzz out there about Canario kind of fitting in, because again, you're talking about a guy who's got a ton of swing and miss, but a ton of power. I could see him being someone who they do try to offer up as one of the keystone pieces of a trade. We won't get into too much speculation there because that's nothing beyond pure speculation. But yeah, it's just like the fit for Judge and the fact that the Cubs keep coming up, and the fact that it's Heyman and then also and now the Joel Sherman, right? They're both at the New York Post. They're both kind of talking about it.
A reputable
kind of their jam
publication.
Yeah, it's very much. It feels a lot like the agent is getting them to juice things a little bit because they want the Yankees or the Mets or somebody.
They may have gotten a free dinner or two out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's how
nice steak.
That's how that stuff makes sense. Like it, and that's what when I wrote that. So speaking of clickbait, right? That's where I wanted to be careful. And I almost added like a subtitle, but you also can't write a title that's 30 words long. But to me, it was like, okay, well, the Cubs reportedly have interest in, the Yankees believe the Cubs have interest in Aaron Judge. But I kind of want to be like,
Heyman,
but it just doesn't make any
Yankees
sense,
believe,
right? Yeah, like check the source, or they're saying that, but it just makes no sense based on what we've seen. And again, Carter Hawkins talking about not messing stuff up for the next 5, 6, 7 years, which is, I think, what's telling.
You can't come out and say that and then do something like that. But I think more interesting out of this Aaron Judge talk is really what happens if he does leave the Yankees. And as you pointed out, what players on the team that he signs with become expendable. You mentioned Yastrzemski on the Giants. And to me, I think that's a much more relevant approach to what happens with Aaron Judge than to say Judge is going to come to Chicago, which is not going to happen.
Right. Well, and that's what's so funny too. Like I've written a couple pieces right about like, hey, here's some under the radar guys who the Cubs might be in the market for. And the intent of that was to look at it and say, the problem that they've had as an organization these past few years, really, I mean, we could say after 2016, after 2017, whatever, was not that they didn't have star players. It's that they didn't properly surround those star players with guys who could fill out the roster really well. And I think when you look at, center field is a position of need for them, where they haven't gotten good production either offensively or defensively. They don't need to hold down that spot for a long time, maybe just another year until Pete Crow Armstrong is ready.
Yeah.
They don't need to spend a ton of money on it, but Mike Yastrzemski is a really good producer, just very consistent. I mean, he's going to be like a 2 to 3 WAR player. If Judge, indeed, there's rumors of the Giants being very interested in him coming out there, which would, I don't think the Giants would non-tender Yastrzemski, but he'd probably be available in a trade. I know some people have said, hey, does an Adrian Sampson deal make sense, right? There's one that frees up a little room in that depth, the pitching depth, if they indeed work out something with Smiley. Yastrzemski can play center field. He can play it capably, pretty solid batter, right? And so all of a sudden, you've made your team better. It's not a huge upgrade. That's not the move to make, but that is a position of need for them. Another one that I could see them, because I wrote about it in that Under the Radar, is going and signing a guy like Kevin Kiermaier, right? Who's coming off of a big deal with the Rays. He's been hurt a lot, but he's still a very good defender out there. I'm pretty sure he's a lefty batter as well, right? Northern Indiana guy. His brother maintains the playing surface there at Wrigley Field. It'd be a cool homecoming for him. I would think he'd be interested in doing that. He's not going to command a huge deal, but again, that's a guy who you can get who say, hey, he's got experience. We can bring him in here. And as long as you're making the correct moves elsewhere, making your splashes, whether that be in the starting rotation, shortstop, whatever, then that's somebody who comes in maybe just on a 1-year prove-it deal, right? And there you go until Armstrong. And I was going to say Yastrzemski, I think he's projected at like $5 to $6 million in arbitration. Has some other, I think, 2 more years of arbitration eligibility. So again, you can keep him around. Hey, if Ian Happ leaves, he can play left. Otherwise, he's a nice bench outfield bat. Those are the guys who aren't going to drive headlines, but I think that's what makes more sense when you talk about all these big splashes happening.
Yeah,
there are inevitably going to be ripple effects that I think the Cubs could maybe take advantage of.
And the Cubs in center field, the Cubs defense was terrible this year. So they really need to upgrade defensively. And where you talk about Yastrzemski not being, a big bat, I mean, listen, all you need is a guy who's going to come out there and be, a positive WAR contributor offensively and can play the position.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, I mean, this isn't a long-term solution, right? This is just something to get the Cubs through next year. The other positions where they need offense from are going to be third base, shortstop, first base, those types of positions where that's where you're going to be looking for your offense from. And I think that's where the most intriguing part of the offseason is going to happen around. And one other thing that you had mentioned was Jose Abreu. And now he's 36 years old, but he had the third best in terms of WAR, the third best year of his career last year, 4.2 WAR. Really turned into a contact guy. He didn't have a lot of home runs, but he had 15 home runs, which is still respectable. And it could be just a blip on the radar because he's typically right around 30 home runs. And so that could be an interesting move for the Cubs. It's just that it's first base. Is he going to platoon? Would he really be that effective of a DH for the Cubs? I think that's where the questions for me kind of come in terms of whether Abreu would really work in just his age.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's difficult. Look, a lot of the peripheral numbers. What's encouraging is that he still hit the ball really hard, right? His lack of power was not a result of poor contact or anything. It's just his launch angle dropped a couple degrees from like 10 to 8. Is that a function
crazy.
of age? Yeah,
That's
is that
crazy.
A function of just something that he was doing differently? Because his strikeout numbers dropped pretty dramatically too. It's just a career low in strikeouts. We're talking about a guy who had close to 600 plate appearances too. So it's not like we're saying, hey, this isn't somebody who was out there. And that's what's funny. Is like all these people are like, oh, he's on the downside. He's been getting worse every year. Somebody tweeted that at me. I was like, you might want to go check his numbers, man.
So. Yeah.
Now again, the power being down is a little bit, but he's still a serviceable first baseman. He's a guy who, and he's a right-handed batter. So if you've got Matt Mervis coming up and you've got Abreu there to be able, again, whether you want to bring Mervis along slowly or whether you simply want to have righty and lefty options at both first base and DH, that's something that's there at his age for Abreu. That is, I would not really be comfortable with anything more than a 2-year deal. And if you can give him two, and here's where I think you can inflate that a little bit. You can bump his average annual value, right? His AAV, whether that's 16, 17, 18 million. That seems like a lot, but if it's only for 2 years, whatever, maybe there's a club option for a third in case, again, he continues to find the fountain of youth. But I think we've seen with a lot of these guys, he doesn't have a ton of tread on the tires because he has played DH quite a bit, so that may help a little. But I think, again, hey, he's in Chicago. He gives them a professional bat in that lineup. So even if the power is not great, he's still hitting the ball really hard. He can take advantage of all fields. He's not platoon dependent, so he's fine against pitchers from either side. So, people took me to task on that. When I say platoon with somebody else, I'm not saying, oh, you're a righty, so you will face lefties and Mervis will face righties, which, again, would put Abreu on the very short side of that. It's more a matter of just saying, hey, these are our two primary people at these positions, and they'll swap back and forth as needs dictate, right? So it's not strictly a handedness thing. But, I think if, right, they go and get more power, and assuming Mervis will be up and providing a lot of that power, and assuming you go out and maybe get a really good hitting middle infielder, I won't say shortstop, that's what those positions are, but maybe they move them around. Then I think Abreu rounds that out really well. Some people are like, well, he doesn't want to be a leader because he doesn't speak English so well. And it's like, okay, great, I guess. But what I'd be looking for is who can set an example for the way you go about your business, the way you prepare yourself. But if we're talking about the loss of Contreras and, if they were to sign Abreu, probably Franmil Reyes is gone as well. I would imagine they would non-tender and maybe try to get him on a minor league deal.
I think he's got to be gone. He's got to be gone either way. But
as cool a dude as he was, and he started out real hot. But if you're like, it's not going to do any good to have somebody batting 212, right? Maybe he can mash 20 homers, but give me Jose Abreu hitting 15 homers, batting 300 with a low strikeout rate. Then
getting on base at a 480 clip.
Yeah, hitting 25 homers with a 215 batting average. But that's when you talk about the leadership. I mean, the Cubs have a lot of those young Latin players who are coming up, and I think with any situation like that, it's good to have somebody who is maybe able to take those guys in particular under his wing. You don't have to be able to speak English to be a clubhouse leader. You don't even have to speak in some cases. A lot of that is just having that gravitas, right? Having that veteran presence. So, yeah, exactly. Like Patrick Wisdom's already there batting in the low 200s and mashing homers. So having him and Reyes, and let's not forget, Reyes can only DH. Like he's not going to play the field, right? He's very limited in that regard. And I just, again, being a right-handed batter, the redundancy between Reyes and Wisdom, and even though Abreu is a different type of bat, if you are talking about Wisdom possibly being displaced and maybe having a place in first base too, or a corner outfield spot, like you don't need two of those same players, let alone, and Wisdom's making less money. I think Reyes is, projected to make about $6 million. And like I said, I could imagine the Cubs trying to non-tendering him and trying to maybe bring him back as a non-roster invitee with a minor league deal or something like that to see.
It'd be fun to see him in spring training.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun to, and here's the other thing I love too. Somebody's like, well, David Ross already said he thought he was coming back. I'm like, okay. Like, what's he going to do? Like,
what's he going to say?
I think we're going to non-tender that guy. We're definitely going to non-tender him. You know what I mean? Like, first of all, it's not his choice. Like, yeah, he's got some input on it, but you're not going to be honest about that. Like, well, here's the list of guys, but I do think of their 10 players, I think they've got 10 ARB eligible players, and I could very much see 6 of them not being tendered a contract. I mean, that helps to solve some of the 40-man crunch, but there's a lot of guys that I don't think are going to be back, and understandably so for the most part. So.
So, I mean, players that realistically the Cubs could sign this offseason. I mean, I think part of the problem that the Cubs are running into, and that any organization that wants to add players this offseason as free agents are running into, is that there's a lot of players that could have a QO, a qualifying offer, attached to them. Some, I mean, Abreu's one that will not, Carlos Correa will not, Noah Syndergaard, the 3 kind of bigger names out there. I don't see the Cubs signing Syndergaard. But you got Rodon, DeGrom, Judge, Bogart, Swanson, Turner, all possibly with a QO attached. My question to you is where the Cubs are likely, they're going to attach a QO to Wilson Contreras. They've already said that. If they actually get the qualifying offer, they get the extra pick, the supplemental pick, will that kind of make it easier for them to sign a player that's got a QO attached?
Yeah, I think so, because effectively those picks will cancel themselves out more or less. I mean, they'll have to forfeit a little bit of the international money, but I think that would make it a lot easier for them, particularly if they're able to, if it is let's say it's a Rodon, or if it is, and I think part of it goes to the longer you sign that person for, that player for, the more impact you feel they're going to have in the next 2 to 3 years, the easier it is to deal with a little bit of an additional loss there, right? Because you know that, or you believe at least, that the impact they're going to have is greater than the potential impact of that draft pick over time. Because if you're talking about somebody in the third-ish round, that player's chance of impacting the team is pretty low. Just, again, just the law of averages is pretty low. And it won't happen for more than likely a minimum of 3 to 4 to 5 years, right? So you're like, what can this person give us right now? So, yeah, I think absolutely if Contreras does turn down the qualifying offer, he does sign elsewhere, I think that helps them better to offset it. Again, depending on who that is that they go after and what they believe that player is going to do. How does that player fit really well with what that is?
I have to be honest. I really do think the Cubs are going to go in on Justin Verlander. I think he fits. Dude, the guy has like a 1.75 ERA this year, which is crazy. He's 39 years old. He's not going to have a qualifying offer attached to him because he had a QO offer QO offer, a qualifying offer last year. I think that makes it so that he cannot have one attached to him again this year. And I mean, he just fits. He's a top of the rotation guy. He'll sign a 2-year deal, 1 to 2 year deal, maybe a 3rd year option or something like that. I mean, I don't want to say I'm going to be surprised if the Cubs don't sign him, but I'm not going to be surprised if they do.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm right there, and that's what I had mentioned in terms of the Drew Smyly thing. I think them possibly working out a new deal with Smyly that reduces his overall hit to the payroll, I think gives him a few extra $1 million that they would love to go spend on somebody who will be in a similar short-term window, 1 or 2 years, right? Assuming they take Smiley's 1-year option and convert it to something like a 2-year. I think I mentioned this last week, but again, if it's a 1-year, $10 million option and you say, hey, we'll give you $12 million for 2 years. Cool. Smyly comes out of it with an extra guaranteed year, $2 million more dollars, but the Cubs have now reduced that AAV by $4 million. And so if they were initially willing to give Verlander $20 million, now they push that to 24 with just those savings alone. Now I'm being very, very overly simplistic here, right? But if you look at it in that regard, you're saying, well, hey, we just bumped up our offer by 20%. Right now maybe they were willing to go 25. Now they go 29, which sounds wild for somebody that age. But again, if they're able to do that over a very limited time, right, and then that 2 years gives them a little bit more time to continue to build up their pitching infrastructure. It allows them to bring some of those guys on slowly, have them in the bullpen. Again, Smyly isn't expected to eat up a ton of innings anyway, and so you're really looking at kind of stretching that rotation out to 6 and even 7 members realistically when we're talking about guys who will have to take the bump. I mean, Verlander makes so much sense, not to mention if we look at it from kind of an emotional standpoint, like he wanted to be traded to the Cubs when the Tigers traded him to Houston in the first place. The Cubs wanted to trade for him. They didn't have the extra money to do it at the time. They didn't have the ability to pull the trigger on adding his contract, which was like $25 million at the time. He's still making about as much as what he was 5 years ago or whatever. But then that missing out on that deal is actually what spurred them to trade for Cole Hamels. What was that, the following trade deadline or whatever? And then if you remember, they ended up trading Drew Smyly because they had signed Smyly to a 2-year deal. Smyly ended up going to the Rangers to free up his money, which was like $6 million, to be able to better afford the $20 million option they picked up on Cole Hamels. So how ironically or just coincidentally full circle would it be for them to restructure a deal with Drew Smyly to be able to sign Justin Verlander, and it brings it all the way back around. I would love that just for a just like the string chart connecting the dots of like, oh, look at how this worked. But Verlander feels like a guy who Jed Hoyer has kind of pined for and kind of wants to make that right. And so I'm with you. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he would actually be the least surprising of all the big time free agents that are out there. Signing him would be the least surprising to me.
It just makes so much sense. He's kind of like that John Lester fit. Granted, he's older. He's a far more dominant pitcher. I mean, obviously he's not a lefty like John Lester was, but I mean, yeah, he's just and he's pitching the value at which he's pitching he's pitching around a $35 to $40 million kind of pitcher.
Yeah.
As crazy as that may sound,
it ain't slowing down, man. I mean, at that age,
it's not slowing down.
Like it's tough. I mean, yeah, could he fall off? But like we're way past. We're 5 or 6 years past the point where if Father Time was really going to start getting him, it would have happened.
Yeah,
I think he may be one of those
entering Nolan Ryan territory.
Yeah, and Ryan was really, really good in that last go round with the Rangers there. Into his 40s. So obviously different pitchers, right? I don't think either of us is trying to say it's the same guy, but he's really, really, really good. And again, it fits so well with what they want to do. I love it. And I think it'd be fun too, right? Like that would be a
ton of fun.
I just think it'd be neat to have that. And he's a different profile of pitcher from what they've got too. So that gives him a little bit of a different vibe. kind of the power guy, being able to go after, miss a lot of bats, right? And they have some other guys who are a little bit more contact based. I love it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
The perfect offseason to me is adding Verlander, adding Correa, getting the qualifying offer pick because Contreras goes and signs somewhere else. And then, obviously bringing in a couple smaller pieces to supplement around there. And that's where the word supplement to me actually means something. I think if you do those things, that next season for the Cubs they're absolutely going to be competing for the division, if not winning the division. So I think those would be two really exciting pieces, and you'd have a very excited fan base.
If you do that, if you go get Correa, Verlander, you sign Abreu, and you go get somebody like Kiermaier, and I know those last, right? Those are all other than Correa. Those are all like what dudes deep into their 30s, right? The other three, but again, if we're talking about 1 or 2 year deals, we're looking at filling positions of need. We're looking at improving power and contact rate. Speaking of which, people are like, "Oh, Abreu's power." Like, have you seen do you remember what the Cubs first baseman did as a whole last year?
Yeah, it was so good.
Right. And you get Verlander, so you get that top of the rotation ace, and now you filled these spots, and then you've backfilled with guys who can not only provide depth, but who do improve your offensive and defensive profile, all the way across. It all of a sudden becomes a team that not only looks a lot better on paper, but that's got a little bit more swagger to it, right? That's got some more cachet, that now people are going to look at other veterans in the same way you mentioned John Lester, that it gets other people to kind of, okay, I like what they're doing here. So, yeah, I think now, to me, if I'm going perfect off season, then it's trade for Ohtani, right? Sign Verlander, trade for Ohtani, sign Correa.
To me, the Ohtani deal feels a lot like the Cubs should just wait and not trade for him, because I think if the Cubs make
next year, assuming he doesn't get an extension, though.
Yeah. If the Cubs, he's not going to. I mean, well, it depends on if the Angels trade him, but with the ownership kind of in flux there.
I'm sorry, I don't want to jump on this, but I'm seeing this comment. How does getting Abreu preclude them from getting starting pitchers?
It doesn't.
Anyway.
We're talking about that. We said Verlander too, so we're talking about all the full piece.
But no, they only get one player, John. One.
How dare you? I think that the Ohtani kind of, if you're trying to get Ohtani, to me, it just makes a lot more sense. Why trade away the prospects? I think if they make the moves that we just talked about, adding like Verlander, Abreu, Correa, and having the guys that are around them already on the Cubs, I think you've got a winning team right there, a team that can get in the playoffs for the next 2 years. You're going to have Jason Hayward's contract is going to be falling off after next season, so you're going to have about $26 million or something like that.
Hendricks will fall off as well.
Hendricks will fall off the books, and so it really opens up a lot of money, right? I mean, those two right there is $40 million. And so you talk about signing a guy like Ohtani, again, like you had mentioned, I mean, that's subject to kind of whether he actually gets traded and if he gets extended. But I see a world where Ohtani does not get traded and stays on the Angels. I think that's probably more likely than him actually getting traded, but who knows? I really would like to see the pursuit of Ohtani, because they just have to give up so many prospects. I just don't think it's worth it. Whereas I think that what we were just saying you only have to pay for it, right? You're not giving up any prospects to do. You're not giving up any picks due to qualifying offers. It just makes a lot more sense. And I think where the Cubs are talking about spending intelligently and just doing things smart, I think to me, that's a smarter route. And if you don't get Ohtani after the end of the season, you don't get him. But if he's a free agent, you're in on it.
Yeah. Well, and that's true. And I think there's, again, the idea that they don't need to jump up to try to become a team that wins 100 games next year. They need to become a team that wins 85 to 90 games next year.
Yeah. They're there.
Right. And I don't think that's not a big leap when you look at how they finish the season and you extrapolate that. That's entirely possible. Now, again, came from a soft schedule. There was some weird stuff in there. They need to absolutely make some other improvements. But if you look at a rotation that goes Verlander, Steele, Stroman, Hendricks, Smiley, right, with Wisniewski, possibly Killian, some other guys waiting in the wings. Keegan Thompson is still there to be able to take some innings. That's you give me Verlander, Steele, Stroman. You give me those top three. I'm good. That's going to win you some ball games, right?
It's going to win you some playoff series is what's going to win you.
And then you look at ideally, I don't know what they do at third base. They need to do. We've talked about that.
If you can move Correa, if you sign Correa and you can move him to third,
that would be ideal. I'd love to see that. Excuse me, with Horner at short. Man, I don't know where this came from, but then I don't even mind Madrigal being at second if you have that. But then you got Mervis at first and or Abreu, one of them there at DH as well. You look at maybe a Kiermaier in center, Happ in left, Suzuki in right, and then whoever's your catcher, Jan Gomes, and then whoever the backup, like that. That is a team that will easily compete in the NL Central, right? Yeah. Easily. And I would say it would be them and the Cardinals. I would say they would leapfrog the Brewers at that point. But if you're battling for that wild card, and then as you said, you still have, right? And we're assuming they'll add quite a bit of payroll, but whatever they do, I could maybe at the most see them going up to $190 million in terms of their payroll. And I think that's a little bit optimistic maybe on my side. That's what I'm saying. I could see it's 175, whatever, but I don't know what it goes.
Where are they with their current commitments, including our?
I haven't looked at it lately. It's
like
it's under 100 million.
Yeah, it's got to.
It
be.
Will like a bunch drops off, so they could add. That's what I'm saying. They could add 75 to 80 million, and being still well below 200 million, right? With a luxury tax threshold that's 30 million above that. What's it going to be next year? 225, whatever it is. So they're well under that. So they could add $75 million this offseason, and then still have a ton of room before they get even close to the threshold, let alone what they'll have fallen off in, again, as you mentioned, not only Hayward, but Hendricks, and also the other Ian Happ, assuming he's not extended. And that'll be about another $10 million, right? So there's a ton.
I have to think they're going to trade Ian Happ. I don't care what the offer is. If they don't, it's just foolishness. I mean, again,
it's 91 million. I knew they were under 100. They're at about 91 million estimated, right? Yeah. So they could add 90 million and still be 20 million below 200. Like it's a very and so that's what I think. I don't believe they're going to try to push all that. Well, I don't believe and I don't want to say I know they won't. I find it very hard to believe they would try to push all their chips in right this offseason. That seems kind of silly just based on what we've heard them say. It would be weird to make that stretch, but they could easily make a couple of really big moves and some other ancillary moves and put themselves in a position to where they still have room to add. Plus, we're talking about these prospects coming up, all kinds of other things going on there. So there is a lot. And the luxury tax is at 233. I was thinking 225 for some reason. It was 233. They're not going to be anywhere near that. So I'm using that as more of a benchmark of just where they could go. I don't see them getting anywhere close to that even the next 2 years.
Yeah.
But there's a lot, and that's the thing is you add players, and depending on where they end up and who ends up coming in there, there's only so much you can trust, right? I mean, Brennen Davis could come up, Pete Crow Armstrong could come up, right? And Davis can slide over to left if Happ is gone. Armstrong is in center. Suzuki's really the only one who's there long term right now of the guys they've got up there, and even who we've mentioned possibly bringing in. So there's still flexibility. Some of these guys can come up through the minors and maybe assume a third base spot, but that's where I think they want to play that in that 2 to 5 year contract range, so they give themselves a little bit of security without, effectively blocking anyone. But I think we are going to see them swing at least one fairly significant trade. I mean, I think
in the offseason.
Yeah, I think, or possibly at the deadline, right? Depending on where things break. Like if they're in that race, I could see them trying to buy, right? And that could come from what happens with the rotation.
Yeah.
Is there some disappointment somewhere else? Do they need to add to the bat? Whatever.
It feels like something would have to go really like catastrophic with the rotation, though. It's just they're so deep. in terms of their pitching. And if they add, one more guy, I mean, and you look at their prospects coming up, it would have to be pretty catastrophic for them to be adding pitching.
That's what I'm saying. Like between, if you look at, I mean, they've already got Morel and Velasquez. Again, I don't know that Velasquez is a dude long term. I think Morel is more.
He's a guy who's going to get traded, and then he's going to be like the AL MVP.
Yes, that's more than likely. Morel, I don't like him very much at any one individual position. I really don't like it at third.
Terrible,
but I like him to be able to play all over the place and provide energy.
If Madrigal doesn't work out, you can see Morel at second base.
Yeah, I could see him at third if he learns how to throw the ball. And like
not triple
trust his arm, but not not overly trust his arm to triple pump and then have to fire one 1,000 miles an hour into the stands.
Yeah, it's like because he can throw the ball so hard, he makes every throw that much more difficult for himself, and that's where you don't want a guy to be, and that's youth. I think it better be.
Yeah, there's a little bit there to that, but I think when you look at if you go Davis and Crow Armstrong, and as I mentioned, Casey and Alcantara and Canario, now are they all going to work out? Of course not. But even if only two of them do, then and within the next, maybe not this year, but by 2024, when you've still got that would be Suzuki's third year, so you've still got 3 years of Suzuki. Your outfield is full. Now you could bring a guy up and have him be your fourth outfielder, move around, but not all of those guys are going to be able to stay in the organization and come up and contribute. It's just not possible. So that's where I'm saying I think Canario and or some other ones, if we look at where they're at with some of those pitchers, whether it be Killian or Wicks or Hers or some of these other ones, I could see those guys being, is that a trade to Cleveland for Shane Bieber, right? Does something like that come into play? That wouldn't surprise me in the least. Or is it to Miami, where they've got a ton of young controlled pitchers as well, right? But excuse me, the Cubs could use a little bit of that depth that they've got, where they is part of keeping Killian down in AAA for the most part there. Obviously they're working through some issues with his walks, but as part of that to kind of preserve that value as much as they can to try to swing some kind of a trade there. There's a lot of interesting things, but I think we see them make some trades as the buyer instead of the seller, both this winter and I could see at the deadline.
Yeah. And you mentioned Brennen Davis in center field, which would be fantastic based on what we know about Brennen Davis, but something that is concerning, at least to me, and isn't really kind of out there at all, is the fact that last week on Monday, Brennen Davis batted once and then was removed early from a game. And then we have not seen him, literally have not laid eyes on Brennen Davis at all. We have not gotten any updates from the Cubs. The only thing we've heard from anybody that's around the team is from Sahadev Sharma, stated that Brennen Davis was expected to be back this weekend, but no reason why. And now he wasn't in the lineup yesterday either. And that really has me concerned. I don't want to be concerned, and I don't want to set off alarms here. And hopefully, I keep saying this, hopefully he's in the lineup tonight,
Yeah.
But what's going on? I mean, why aren't the Cubs letting us? There's definitely something going on with Brennen Davis. He tweaked something or whatever, strained something, who knows? But why don't we have any information on what is the number one prospect in their system?
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing that's really tough about the minors, right? In the major leagues, exactly what is going. I mean, maybe not exactly, right? But when someone's out, we get a report immediately. Here's what the injury was. They are placed on the IL with an injury designation. We know what it is for the most part. Now, are there certain times when they kind of obscure things? Yes. But with the minors, dudes can just be put on the IL and we never know about it until after the season is over or, until they say something or, a report may come out. But
yeah, it's weird. You just muted yourself.
My mic came unplugged.
I just the excitement of the content.
But especially in the AFL, right, where it's not like it's an affiliate controlled, you know what I mean? There's multiple, but it's not as if they're at an affiliate facility where everybody's on that same thing. It's kind of a normal one. You have more.
I mean, the Cubs, they are actually playing at Sloan Park.
They are right, but I'm saying like it's not, the Solar Sox are not strictly a Cubs team, right? So it's not as if you've got the Cubs controlled managers and other players and all this, and there could be all kinds of different things going on to where they're saying, hey, you know, if the slightest thing comes up, you're down for at least a week. Like, who knows? You know, there could be all kinds of various things going on there.
What I don't get is that there's obviously something going on, whether it's serious or not. Let's hope it's not serious. Obviously, we're all hoping it's not serious. What I don't get is why you hold him out for a week after it. You know, it's just he leaves the game early, and then now he's out for over a week. You know, just give us an update on what's happening there.
And there was nothing discernible, right? I mean, that was the thing. It's not like he was limping or, you know, hopping off the field. People didn't know what was going on.
Why are you holding? Yeah, it's funky. So, I mean, hopefully we'll find out something about that within the next day or two, or we should have found out about it last week, but who knows? We'll see what's going on there. Again, don't want to speculate too much, but I am concerned. Championship Series predictions. I was hoping we could make our Championship Series predictions today, but the Yankees and the Guardians didn't play for some strange reason, because they felt like it was important to try to get that game in prime time where they could have seen that the rain was coming and actually moved the start time up a couple of hours. They did not do that.
That's the same. Here's the thing. The reason that didn't happen is the same reason. Which one was it? Was it game 5? The 2017 NLDS Cubs Nats that got rained out. But the reason that didn't happen, the reason it didn't happen last night is because MLB has to clear that with the TV broadcast partner. So the broadcast partner has to agree to it. So it's not like MLB or the teams like when the Cubs and Nats, and that was a game that Steven Strasburg was supposed to pitch, and then it got rained out. And then there's a whole thing about mold the next morning. Dusty Baker wasn't gonna start him, and then he did start, and it was like an even crappier night the next night, and they still played. And I sat through it, and it was awful. But that was the same thing. Everyone knew, you could see it clear as day on the radar, that there was a bunch of rain coming in that afternoon. Fine, overcast, no rain, could have easily played it, right? No problem. Poured down rain. They had to bang the game after an hour delay, and it came to be that both teams had said, yeah, we're cool with moving it up. We can see what's going on. But I think it was, I can't remember if it was TBS or Fox or whatever, said, nope, we're keeping this in this evening slot. And that's what the same thing was with the game last night. They could have gotten it done earlier, but they wanted it in the primetime viewing window, especially because it would have been the only game. And that's what happens. So when you're making billions and billions and billions of dollars from your network broadcast partners, particularly when so much of that is back weighted toward the postseason, you do what they say. And that's why the game didn't get played.
Yeah. And so looking at our predictions, I'm just going through here. Let's see. In the wild card round, we were 2-2. And then in the division series so far, I'm 2-1. You had the Braves. I had the Phillies, and the Phillies ended up winning, which I was pretty happy about. Then the Astros and the Mariners, we both had the Astros, and they ended up winning. The Guardians and the Yankees. I had the Guardians. You had the Yankees. So that's TBD. And then the Padres and Dodgers, we both whiffed big time, just like the Dodgers.
Yeah. Woo!
That was surprising, and just really a weird series. But hey, man,
now everybody in
kudos to
LA
the Pods.
is whining about it because
I know,
we should have gotten it. You got to buy
111 games.
You got to buy, and then you had 5 games. Well, it should be a 7-game series. Like, what? Oh, how about when you're the Chicago Cubs in 2015 and you won 97 games, 3rd most games in all of Major League Baseball? What was their reward? Oh, they got to go to Pittsburgh, who won 98 games, and play in a 1-game winner-take-all wild card, which the Cubs obviously won. But, like, you want to talk about getting screwed. Pittsburgh got screwed. Or how about in 2008 when the Cubs won, 98 games, best record in the National League, I think 2nd or 3rd best record in Major League Baseball. They got swept by the 84-win Dodgers, who got in as a wild card team. I didn't see anybody in LA bitching about that one, saying the Cubs should have just gotten a bye past them. You know what I mean? Like, that's just, man, it's silly to me. Yeah, we should win the Dodgers. We should you take your Mickey Mouse ass rings that you won from that fake season and just go look at those for a while longer. Maybe the next time you win one in a real season, then you can come and talk.
Been a while.
How about that, Dodgers?
Been a while. Like, was it 89? Was that the last World Series?
Yeah, maybe the next time there's an earthquake.
That's a while. That was a while. Okay, so looking forward, though, we can't really pick our championship series winners, but we do have the Phillies taking on the Padres, and so we can pick that, and then I guess we can kind of pick the other one based on whether it's going to be the Guardians or the Yankees against the Astros. So let's get to your input first. Padres or Phillies? I think that game do the Phillies have the home field there?
I haven't even paid attention. I'm gonna take the Phillies. Okay. I've picked against them. I think both so far. I don't think I've favored them yet. So I'm going with the Phils.
Yeah, I want to see the Phillies win just because of the Cubs connections, Schwarber there and Castellanos, but I just don't know. I think the Padres kind of got some swagger. They've got some confidence. They're swinging the bat pretty well. And I think the addition of Soto is really going to pay off in this series. So I'm going to go with the Padres. So I'm going to write that down. Padres is John is a Padres and Phillies is Evan. Okay. And then we've got the Astros and either the Guardians or the Yankees. I'm going to go first.
I'm going Astros either way.
Yeah, that's where I'm going. I
would have taken the Yankees, but the fact that with Efros being hurt, with Chapman being out, although Chapman being there might have been worked to the Astros' favor, but it feels like the Astros, as much as I can't stand it, but I can't stand the Yankees either. Yeah, I'm gonna take the Astros regardless.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see the Guardians win and get to the World Series, just because they haven't won and they're kind of like the one.
When was the last time they were in the World Series? Do you remember?
The last time they were in the World Series, God, it's kind of,
people forget.
I think it was like 5-6 years ago, something like that.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. If memory serves.
2016, that's what it was. And there was a rain delay. There was a rain delay.
They're used to that. This last one's just like about 23 hours too long, maybe for them. Who knows?
Where in the world is Jason Hayward right now? He better not be in that Yankees locker room.
Pep talking them for a while. He's been in there for a day and a half.
He's giving a TED talk right now in the Yankees locker room. Okay, so you've got the Phillies. I've got the Padres, and we both have the Astros. I have to pull. My wife's from Texas. I've got a good buddy who's a huge Astros fan. His whole family's Astros fans. He was here this past weekend, and we were watching the game together. And he's got a whole kind of story behind his Astros fanness and his family. So I think that's cool. So I got to go with the Astros for those reasons. So we'll see what happens. It should be fun. Yeah. Game tonight. Game starts in 2 hours. Actually, it's 1:00 my time, 4:00 your time.
Yeah, that'll be a weird one. I don't know. Yeah, I'll flip through there. I've been catching up on a lot of horror movies. Otherwise, with it being October and all. So I don't know. Maybe it'll turn out to be a horror movie for one of those two teams tonight, one or the other, or this afternoon, whatever the case may be.
We'll find out. Cool. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll try to circle back. We're going to try to do these once a week to the extent it makes sense. If there's just no content going on, we probably won't have a show. But for now, we'll plan on once a week, either Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, something like that, depending on our schedules. So thanks for you being flexible, and have a good rest of your week.
See you, everybody.